I ate it for telling my stepdaughter that if she stays home from school then she needs to go to her mother's. It's funny how life can throw you into roles you never imagined. I never planned to be the stepmother of 3 kids, let alone the full-time caretaker of 7. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I saw myself here, juggling a newborn, 3 of my own kids, and 3 stepkids, I would have laughed. But here I am, drowning in it all, and wondering how on earth I let things get this far. I've been with my husband, Mark, for 4 years now. He's a great guy, a hard worker. He drives trucks. Working grueling hours from 4 a.m. to sometimes 8 p.m. He came into the relationship with 3 kids. Just like me. Then, we added one of our own. A beautiful 5-month-old baby girl, who I'm still breastfeeding, by the way, and who wakes up every couple of hours throughout the night. That alone would be enough to drive any mom crazy. But no, on top of that, I have 6 other kids to look after, most of them dealing with their own drama. In theory, this is all supposed to work. The older kids go to school during the day. The younger ones keep each other entertained. And every other weekend, they all go to their respective other parents' homes. It's a well-oiled machine. Or at least it's supposed to be. But lately, that machine's been breaking down at every turn. For the past 3 weeks, sickness has swept through our house like some plague, jumping from one kid to another. First, it was my youngest boy. Then the twins. Then my middle one. And back again. Between fevers, coughing fits, and trips to the pediatrician, I've barely had time to breathe, let alone get any rest myself. And, of course, I caught it too. Because that's just how it goes. Right? The mom always gets sick. But she's the last one allowed to rest. The only one who hasn't been touched by this sickness is my stepdaughter, Hannah. At 12 years old, she seems to have the immune system of a tank. Not a sniffle, not a cough, nothing. And while you'd think I'd be grateful for that, it's been a source of tension lately. Because while the other kids have been home legitimately battling fevers and coughing fits, Hannah's been watching from the sidelines, irritated that she hasn't gotten the luxury of staying home from school. Apparently, she feels left out because everyone else has gotten their break from the daily grind. And she hasn't. When she first started hinting at staying home, I brushed it off. I wasn't about to entertain the idea of a healthy kid skipping school just because she wanted a day off. I told her flat out, the other kids aren't skipping school for fun. They're home because they're sick. You're not sick, so you're going to school. I thought that would be the end of it. But I should have known better. Kids are persistent, especially when they feel like they're missing out on something. And then, one night, without consulting me, Mark let her stay home. She complained of a tiny canker sore in her mouth. And he gave her the green light to take the day off. No discussion with me. No checking if I was okay with handling one more kid at home. Nothing. He just said yes. And I was left to deal with the fallout. I knew I was angry about it even before the next day began. The moment he told her yes, I felt a wave of frustration bubbling up inside me. Not just because she didn't need to stay home, but because I was already at my wits' end trying to juggle everything. And now I was going to have to deal with Hannah too. On top of everything else. The next morning came, and just like I expected, it was chaos from the start. I got the other kids onto their respective buses, each leaving at different times, and then I came back into the house. I had this faint hope that maybe Hannah would just hang out in her room or watch TV quietly while I caught up on some much-needed rest. But no, as soon as I walked through the door, there she was, waiting for me, asking what I was going to cook her for breakfast. I told her to have cereal. Easy, quick, and something she could make herself. But, of course, that wasn't good enough. She wanted a full breakfast, eggs, pancakes, hash browns, the works. And when I said no, she stormed off to her room and slammed the door. Great. Just what I needed. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on getting the baby back to sleep. But it was like Hannah was determined to make the day as difficult as possible. Over the next couple of hours, she came into the nursery 9 times. 9 times. Each time, she had a new request. Could I take her shopping? Could I watch her cook something because she was hungry again? Could we go to the mall? And each time, she woke up the baby, Who'd barely slept as it was. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I was fuming. I had never been so frustrated in my life. I kept asking myself, why is she doing this? Why is she being so difficult? It wasn't like Hannah to be this disruptive. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was probably just bored. She wasn't sick. After all, she wasn't used to staying home from school. And now that she was, she had no idea how to fill the time. And I wasn't giving her the attention she craved because I simply couldn't. Between the baby and my own exhaustion, I had nothing left to give. By the time the rest of the kids got home from school, I was on the verge of losing it. The baby hadn't slept for more than 30 minutes all day, thanks to Hannah's constant interruptions. And when Mark finally walked through the door after his long shift, I couldn't hold it in any longer. When Hannah asked to stay home again the next day because of her mouth pain, I snapped. I didn't care if it made me sound like the worst stepmother in the world. I told her that if she was staying home again, she was going to her mother's. I couldn't do it anymore. I was done. It wasn't just about that one day with Hannah. It was the accumulation of everything over the past few weeks that had me at my breaking point. I felt like I was carrying the weight of the entire household on my back. And every time I thought things couldn't get worse, another wave of chaos hit. I was already stretched too thin. And Hannah's insistence on staying home just tipped me over the edge. My husband, Mark, has always worked long hours. As a truck driver, his shifts are brutal. He's out the door at 4 a.m. and sometimes he doesn't get back until 8 p.m. most days. I feel like a single parent. I'm the one waking up with the baby in the middle of the night. The one getting the kids ready for school. The one doing the laundry, cooking meals, cleaning the house, and managing every little thing that comes with running a household of this size. Mark works hard, I get that, but sometimes I feel like he forgets how much I do, too. He's not here to see the constant chaos I have to manage. And it's been wearing me down. The sickness that's been running through the house has been relentless. It started with my youngest son. And one by one, it's taken down almost everyone, except for Hannah. Fever, coughing, sleepless nights. I've been dealing with it all, while also being sick myself. I haven't had more than a few hours of uninterrupted sleep in weeks. I don't have time to take care of myself because there's always someone else who needs something. And yet, somehow, the expectation is that I'll keep going. Like I'm this endless well of energy that can never run dry. I'm exhausted, physically and mentally, and it's been building for weeks. Hannah's been watching all of this from the sidelines. Not sick but jealous. She didn't get to miss out on school like the other kids. And she's been fixated on that. It's like she feels left out because she hasn't gotten the same treatment as her siblings. I know that sounds ridiculous. But she's 12, and in her world, everything has to be fair. Her siblings got to stay home. So she wants her turn too. But what she doesn't realize is that her siblings were sick. They weren't staying home for fun, they were miserable. And I was miserable right along with them. Trying to keep everything together. When she first started dropping hints about staying home, I thought it was just typical 12-year-old behavior. Kids always look for a way to get out of school, right? I brushed it off and told her that unless she was actually sick, she needed to go to school. I wasn't about to let her stay home just because she was bored or didn't feel like going. The other kids weren't skipping school for fun. They were genuinely sick, and I made that clear to her. But then she went to Mark. And that's when everything changed. Mark doesn't always check in with me before making decisions about the kids. And that's been a sore spot for me since we got married. I get it. He's tired after working long hours. And he just wants to make things easy for everyone. But I'm the one who's here all day, dealing with everything. So when he makes a decision without consulting me, it's like he's ignoring everything I'm going through. When Hannah asked him if she could stay home because of a tiny canker sore in her mouth, he said yes. No discussion with me, no checking to see if I was okay with it. Just, yes. And that was it. He got to go off to work. And I was left to deal with another kid at home. I was already frustrated before the day even began. I could feel the tension building inside me. This slow burn that had been simmering for weeks. I knew I was close to my breaking point. But I was trying to hold it together. I didn't want to snap. I didn't want to be the mean stepmom. But I was so tired. Tired of being the one who had to handle everything while Mark made decisions without thinking about how they impacted me. When I tried to bring it up with him later that evening, he brushed it off. She's just a kid, he said. She wasn't feeling well. What's the big deal? And that's when it hit me. He didn't get it. He wasn't here, so he didn't see what I was dealing with. He didn't understand how much energy it took to manage everything. He just saw a small issue, a canker sore, a day off school, and didn't think it was a big deal. But to me, it was another burden I couldn't handle. What he didn't understand was that I was exhausted. Beyond exhausted. I wasn't getting the support I needed. And it felt like no one saw what I was going through. Not even him. That's what hurt the most. So when Hannah stayed home and spent the day pestering me, waking up the baby, and demanding attention, it felt like the final straw. I wasn't just frustrated with her, I was frustrated with Mark. With the whole situation, I felt like I was being pushed to the limit, and no one seemed to care. I knew I was angry, but I also knew that I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give, and if Mark wasn't going to step in and help, then I had to set my own boundaries. I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to feel like I was pushing Hannah away. But I also couldn't keep doing everything on my own. I needed help. I needed Mark to understand that I couldn't handle one more thing. Not without completely losing myself in the process. And that's where my frustration with him came from. He wasn't there, and he wasn't seeing the toll this was taking on me. And now, with Hannah staying home and adding to the chaos, I felt like I was losing control of everything. It wasn't just about one day. It was about everything that had been building up for weeks. The exhaustion, the sickness, the lack of sleep, the constant demands, and Mark's decision to let Hannah stay home without checking with me felt like the final insult. Like my needs didn't matter. And that's when I realized, I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change. The day started like every other, complete chaos. I barely got a few hours of sleep the night before. Between the baby waking up to nurse and my own cold making it impossible to breathe. I didn't think I could feel any more exhausted. But I was wrong. By 6 a.m., I was already running on fumes. Getting the other kids ready for school, packing lunches, and trying to get everyone out the door. Hannah stayed behind, of course. Because of her canker sore. I kept telling myself I could handle one more day. Just one more. But deep down, I knew I wasn't handling anything. I was just barely surviving. The thought of another full day with Hannah at home, on top of everything else, was like a weight pressing down on my chest. As soon as the other kids were on the bus and out of the house, I collapsed onto the couch, hoping for just a moment of peace. Maybe I could close my eyes for a few minutes before the baby woke up again. But, of course, Hannah had other plans. "Hey," she said, suddenly standing over me like I'd summoned her. "What are you making me for breakfast?" I opened my eyes, blinking in the dim light of the living room. "There's cereal in the kitchen," I mumbled, trying to muster up some energy. She wrinkled her nose like I just suggested she eat dirt. "I don't want cereal. I want pancakes. Or eggs. And bacon." I sighed. It wasn't even 8 a.m., and I already didn't have the patience for this. "Hannah, just have cereal. I can't make a big breakfast right now." "But I don't want cereal," she whined, crossing her arms like a petulant child. "Why can't you make something real?" I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to stay calm. "Because I'm exhausted, and I need to take care of the baby. Please, just have cereal." Hannah huffed and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. Great. It wasn't even an hour into the day, and I already felt like I was on the verge of losing it. I tried to settle back down, but the peace didn't last long. Hannah came in and out of the living room, finding a new reason to bother me every 5 minutes. She wanted to go shopping for a new outfit for her dance class. Then she wanted me to watch her cook something. Then she wanted me to take her to the mall so she could spend some money. Every request came with a sense of entitlement that I couldn't even begin to understand. It was like she didn't care that I was barely keeping it together. The baby, who had been fussy all night, finally fell asleep around 9 a.m. I thought I could maybe catch a short nap while she slept. But within minutes, Hannah was back. She barged into the nursery, loud and careless, asking me where I kept the extra towels because she wanted to take a bath. I whispered as sharply as I could. Hannah, please be quiet. The baby just fell asleep. Oh, she said, not bothering to lower her voice. But can you show me where the towels are? I pointed toward the linen closet, hoping she'd just leave, but no, she lingered for a few more minutes, making enough noise to wake the baby up. And just like that, my brief hope for rest evaporated. The baby's cries filled the room, and I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my chest. For the next few hours, the pattern repeated itself. Every time the baby fell asleep, Hannah would find some excuse to come barging in. She'd slam her door, she'd shout from the kitchen, she'd, accidentally, drop something loud. And every time, the baby would wake up crying. And I'd have to start the process all over again. It wasn't just that Hannah was being annoying, though she absolutely was. It was that she was doing it on purpose. She wanted attention, and she was going to get it, even if it meant making my day a living hell. She knew I couldn't just drop everything and take her shopping, so she decided to sabotage what little peace I had left. By noon, I was ready to scream. The baby hadn't slept for more than 30 minutes all day. I was running on fumes. My body ached from being sick, and my patience was wearing thin. Every time Hannah came into the room, I felt a fresh wave of anger surge through me. But I kept it together. Barely. Around 2 p.m., I thought maybe, just maybe, I could sneak in a quick nap while the baby nursed. But as soon as I settled onto the couch, cradling the baby in my arms, Hannah marched back into the room. Hey, she said, her voice grating on my last nerve. Can we go to the mall now? I looked up at her, incredulous. Hannah, I've told you already, I can't take you to the mall today. The baby hasn't slept, and I'm exhausted. I need to rest. She rolled her eyes. But I'm bored, and it's not fair that everyone else gets to stay home and relax while I have to go to school. I felt my temper flare. Relax? You think this is relaxing? She shrugged, as if she couldn't care less about what I was going through. I just want to do something fun. Before I could respond, the baby started crying again, and I felt my frustration bubble over. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done. Done with the whining. Done with the demands. Done with trying to keep everything together while everyone else seemed determined to make my life harder. By the time Mark got home from work that night, I was at my breaking point. I had never been so angry in my life. The house was a mess. The baby was overtired and screaming, and I felt like I was about to lose it. When Hannah walked into the room and asked if she could stay home again the next day because of her mouth pain, I snapped. Okay, I said, my voice ice cold. Then you'd better call your mother and go there. Because I'm not doing this again. Mark looked at me, startled. Why would she go to her mom's? I gave him a look that could have melted steel. Because I'm not watching a kid who isn't really sick and spends the entire day keeping the baby awake. I'm exhausted, Mark. I can't do this again. Hannah looked at me like I just slapped her. You hate me, don't you? She said, her voice trembling. I didn't even have the energy to argue. I just walked away, leaving Mark to deal with the fallout. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done. I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. I had reached my limit. And walking away felt like the only way to protect what little sanity I had left. As soon as I stepped into the bedroom, I felt the weight of the day crush me all at once. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. Trying to breathe, trying to hold myself together. The sounds of Hannah crying from the living room echoed in my ears. But I couldn't bring myself to care in that moment. I knew she thought I hated her. And maybe to a 12-year-old, it really felt that way. But I didn't hate her. I was just tired of the chaos. Tired of feeling like I was carrying everything alone. Tired of being expected to hold it together when I was barely hanging on by a thread. Mark didn't follow me into the bedroom right away. But I knew he would eventually. I could hear him trying to comfort Hannah in the other room. His voice low and soothing. The way he always was with her. It wasn't that he didn't care about my feelings. I knew he did. But he had this blind spot when it came to his kids. Especially Hannah. He couldn't see that what I was asking for wasn't unreasonable. I wasn't trying to push her away. I just needed help. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. My thoughts swirling around me like a storm I couldn't control. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe telling her to go to her mother's house was too harsh. But the truth was, I couldn't take another day of this. Not like today. The door creaked open a few minutes later, and I heard Mark's heavy footsteps as he stepped into the room. I didn't sit up, didn't even turn to look at him. I just kept my eyes on the ceiling, waiting for the inevitable conversation. "So, what the hell happened today?" he asked. His voice strained. I let out a long breath, not sure where to even start. "I'm exhausted, Mark. I've been telling you that for weeks. And you just keep adding more to my plate without even asking if I can handle it." He sighed, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "She's a kid. She wasn't feeling well. You didn't need to snap like that." "She wasn't sick," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "She wanted to stay home because she's bored. She spent the entire day keeping the baby awake, knowing I needed a break. And you just said yes without even thinking about what that meant for me. I'm the one who has to deal with it, Mark, not you." "I didn't think it would be such a big deal," he muttered. She said her mouth hurt. I sat up then, unable to keep it in any longer. "A canker sore, Mark. A tiny canker sore. And you let her stay home. I get it. You want to make her happy. But you don't get to make decisions like that without talking to me first. I can't handle all of this on my own. And it's like you don't even realize how much I'm drowning over here." He looked at me, guilt flickering in his eyes. But I could see he still didn't fully understand. "I'm sorry," he said, but it felt like a half-hearted apology. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you." I shook my head, frustrated. "It's not just about today, Mark. It's everything. The sickness, the lack of sleep, the constant demands. I haven't had a moment to breathe in weeks. And you keep saying yes to things without thinking about how they'll affect me." Silence filled the room, the weight of it pressing down on both of us. He rubbed his face, clearly exhausted himself. "Look, I get it. Things have been crazy. But she's upset now. She thinks you hate her." I scoffed, feeling a pang of guilt but also a wave of frustration. "I don't hate her. But she doesn't get to walk all over me just because she wants attention. She kept the baby up all day. Mark, I haven't slept in weeks. And I needed her to just respect that for once. She's 12, he said quietly. She doesn't know how to deal with all of this. And I'm not 12, I shot back. But that doesn't mean I don't have my limits." He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at the floor. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of everything was finally sinking in. But I wasn't sure it really was. "I'm not the bad guy here," I said, my voice softer now. "I'm doing the best I can. And I need you to see that. I need you to be on my side." Mark let out a long breath and finally met my eyes. "I know you're doing a lot. More than I've realized. I'm sorry I haven't been paying attention. I didn't think it was this bad." "It is," I said, my voice cracking a little. "I can't do this alone." He nodded slowly, reaching for my hand. "Okay, I'll talk to her. We'll figure this out." I squeezed his hand, grateful for the gesture but still feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't sure a simple conversation would fix things. But it was a start. That night, after we had calmed down, I lay in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The kids were asleep, the baby finally resting peacefully in her crib. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something bigger than just today's argument. I wasn't sure where we went from here. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change. The days after that argument with Mark passed in a fog. The routine stayed the same. Get the kids ready. Tend to the baby. Keep the house running. But I felt distant. Like I was moving through the motions without really being present. Mark and I barely talked. And when we did, it felt like we were tiptoeing around the real issue. Afraid that saying too much would cause another explosion. Hannah was quiet for the next few days. She didn't push back on going to school. And she kept to herself more than usual. Part of me was relieved that she wasn't pestering me constantly. But another part of me felt guilty. I didn't want her to think I hated her. But I also couldn't handle the chaos she'd been bringing into my life. I hoped that maybe, after what happened, things would settle down. But I knew it was just a temporary fix, nothing had really changed. Mark was trying to be more present. But with his long hours, there wasn't much he could do. He'd come home after work, tired and worn down, and ask how things were going. But it always felt superficial. I'd give him a quick update, but I could tell he wasn't fully grasping the depth of my exhaustion. My frustration. He'd nod, tell me to hang in there. And that would be the end of it. There was no real resolution. No real acknowledgement of how close I was to completely breaking down. And then, it all came to a head. It was a Thursday afternoon. And I was just trying to get through the day. The baby had been fussy all morning, refusing to nap, and I was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep. I'd barely eaten, and I hadn't had a moment to myself since I woke up. The house was a mess, dishes piling up in the sink, toys scattered everywhere, laundry overflowing. It felt like everything was closing in on me, and I could feel that familiar sense of panic bubbling up in my chest. Hannah came home from school, and I could tell something was off the moment she walked through the door. She was quiet, withdrawn, which wasn't like her. Normally, she'd be asking a million questions or complaining about her day. But today, she just went straight to her room without saying a word. I thought about checking on her, but I didn't have the energy. I just needed a break. A few minutes to breathe. But of course, that wasn't in the cards. The baby woke up crying, and I could hear one of the other kids arguing about something in the kitchen. I felt like I was on the verge of a complete meltdown. And then Hannah came back into the living room. I don't feel good, she said, her voice quiet but insistent. I turned to look at her, trying to keep my patience in check. What's wrong? My stomach hurts, she mumbled, wrapping her arms around herself. I sighed, trying to summon some sympathy. Did you eat something bad at school? She shrugged, but I could tell she wasn't being entirely truthful. I don't know. Can I stay home tomorrow? That was it, the final straw. I could feel the frustration boiling up inside me. And before I knew it, I snapped. No, Hannah, you can't stay home tomorrow. I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You're not sick. You're not staying home again just because you feel like it. Her eyes widened in surprise. And for a moment, I thought she was going to argue with me. But instead, her face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. You hate me, she whispered, her voice shaking. You always get mad at me. You never let me do anything. I opened my mouth to respond, to try to explain that it wasn't about hating her. But the words got caught in my throat. I was too tired, too overwhelmed, and the truth was, I didn't have the energy to reassure her right now. She turned and ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. The baby started crying again, and I felt like I was going to lose it. My head was pounding, my body was aching, and I couldn't take one more thing. I sat down on the couch, trying to hold back my own tears. But it was no use. The floodgates opened, and I started sobbing, my shoulders shaking with the weight of everything I'd been holding in for weeks. I didn't even try to stop it. I just let it all out, the exhaustion, the frustration, the guilt, the anger, it all came pouring out. And I couldn't stop. Mark came home an hour later and found me sitting on the couch. The baby asleep in my arms. My eyes swollen and red from crying. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, taking in the scene, the mess, the exhaustion on my face, the tension that had been hanging in the air for days. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Understanding. I didn't realize, he said quietly, sitting down next to me. I wiped at my eyes. Too tired to respond. I knew you were tired. But I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. He continued, his voice soft. I should have been paying more attention. I'm sorry. I nodded, still unable to find the words. But hearing him say it, finally acknowledging how much I'd been struggling, felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I'll talk to Hannah, he said after a long pause. And I'll make sure she understands. You don't hate her. You're just overwhelmed. We both are. I leaned into him, closing my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that he finally saw what I'd been going through. But sadness that it had taken me breaking down for him to realize it. I don't know how much longer I can do this, I whispered, my voice barely audible. We'll figure it out, he promised, wrapping his arm around me. We'll figure it out together. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know if anything would actually change. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this. And that was enough for now. The next few days passed in a blur. But there was a shift in the air. Mark actually seemed to be making an effort. Something that had been sorely missing for too long. It wasn't anything big. He didn't magically have more time or suddenly turn into the perfect partner. But there was a noticeable difference. He started asking more questions about how I was doing, how the kids were, and he even tried to get home a little earlier when he could. Small things, but they felt significant. Hannah, on the other hand, had gone quiet. After our last blow-up, she kept her distance, barely speaking to me unless it was absolutely necessary. I could tell she was still hurt. And honestly, I felt bad about it. She was just a kid, caught in the middle of a situation that wasn't really her fault. But I didn't know how to fix it. Every time I tried to reach out, she'd shut down or avoid me altogether. It felt like we were stuck in this awkward limbo. And I wasn't sure how to bridge the gap. Mark promised to talk to her. And he did. One night after dinner, he sat her down in the living room while I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up and pretending not to listen. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught bits and pieces of the conversation. He was trying to explain why I had snapped, why things had been so tense lately. He told her that I didn't hate her, that I was just overwhelmed and tired, and that I loved her. I waited for her response, but all I heard was silence. After a while, Mark came into the kitchen and gave me a small smile. She's upset, but I think she gets it, he said. Give her some time. I nodded, hoping he was right, but I wasn't so sure. I wasn't sure if a simple conversation could fix the damage that had been done. The resentment that had built up on both sides. The next day, something unexpected happened. Hannah came home from school, and instead of going straight to her room, she came into the kitchen where I was making dinner. Do you need help? She asked quietly, her eyes avoiding mine. I paused, taken aback. It wasn't like her to offer help, especially not after everything that had happened. But I wasn't about to turn her down. Sure, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. You can chop the vegetables if you want. She nodded and took the cutting board, working in silence as I stirred a pot on the stove. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. But I didn't push her to talk. I figured if she wanted to say something, she would. After a few minutes, she spoke up. I didn't mean to make things hard for you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stopped what I was doing and turned to look at her. She was still chopping, her eyes focused on the vegetables in front of her. I know, I said softly. I didn't handle things very well either. She shrugged, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I just wanted to stay home for once. I didn't think it would make you so mad. I sighed, leaning against the counter. It wasn't just about you staying home, Hannah. I've been really tired, and I felt like you didn't understand how much I needed a break. She didn't say anything for a while, just kept chopping the vegetables with careful precision. Then, after a long pause, she said, I don't want you to hate me. My heart clenched at her words. I don't hate you, I said firmly. I never have. I've just been really overwhelmed. And sometimes I don't handle things the way I should. But I don't hate you. I love you. She glanced up at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign that I was lying. When she didn't find any, she gave a small nod, then went back to chopping. We didn't talk much after that. But something had shifted. It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Mark and I sat on the couch together. A rare moment of peace between the chaos of our lives. The baby was finally asleep. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning in exhaustion. I could still feel it lingering in the background. The weight of everything we'd been through. But it didn't feel as crushing as before. I talked to her, I said quietly, resting my head on Mark's shoulder. Yeah? He asked, wrapping his arm around me. How did it go? Better than I expected, I admitted. She's hurt, but I think we're going to be okay. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. Good. I knew you would work it out. I didn't respond, just let myself relax into him. For once, it felt like maybe things were starting to turn around. Maybe we could get back to some sense of normalcy. Whatever that looked like for our chaotic family. But deep down, I knew we still had a long way to go. The exhaustion, the tension, it wasn't something that would disappear overnight. We had to keep working at it. Keep finding ways to support each other. And I had to learn how to ask for help before I hit my breaking point again. As I sat there with Mark, feeling the weight of everything but also a strange sense of hope, I realized that this was just one chapter in a much bigger story. A story of a blended family, of navigating the chaos and the challenges, and of figuring out how to make it all work. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we could. In the days that followed, things began to settle, but the heaviness of what had happened lingered in the air. I still felt like I was treading water. But now at least, I wasn't drowning. Mark's effort to be more present was noticeable. Even if his long hours limited how much he could do. He started coming home earlier when possible and actually asked how my day went in a way that felt genuine. It wasn't much, but it felt like we were beginning to rebuild some of the trust and connection that had gotten lost in the chaos. Hannah was still quiet around me, but the tension between us had eased. There were no more fights, no more slammed doors, no more insistence on staying home from school just to escape boredom. She hadn't mentioned her canker sore again, and part of me wondered if she had realized how much her behavior had been affecting the rest of the house. I didn't push her to talk about it, though. I figured that would come in time. One afternoon, about a week later, Hannah surprised me again. I was sitting on the couch with the baby, trying to catch up on laundry while she napped, when Hannah came into the room holding a notebook. "Hey," she said hesitantly, sitting down next to me. "Can I show you something?" I glanced up, surprised by her request. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, not wanting to scare her off. She handed me the notebook, and as I flipped through it, I realized it was filled with sketches. They were detailed drawings of dresses. Some casual, some formal, all of them carefully designed. I had no idea Hannah was so talented. Her drawings were beautiful. Far more intricate than anything I would have expected from a 12-year-old. "These are amazing, Hannah," I said, genuinely impressed. "Did you do all of these yourself?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Yeah, I've been working on them for a while. I want to be a fashion designer someday." "I had no idea," I said, still flipping through the pages. "You're really talented." Her smile widened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a spark of joy in her eyes. "Thanks," she said quietly. "I haven't really shown anyone before." "Why not?" I asked, handing the notebook back to her. She shrugged, looking down at the pages. "I don't know. I guess I didn't think anyone would care." I frowned, my heart aching at her words. "Of course we care. This is amazing. Hannah, you should show your dad, he'd be so proud." She didn't say anything for a moment, just flipped through the notebook absent-mindedly. Then, after a long pause, she said, "I thought maybe we could go shopping for fabric sometime. I want to try making one of these." I blinked, surprised by her request. It wasn't lost on me that this was the same girl who had been pestering me to take her shopping when she faked being sick. But this felt different. This felt like she was trying to connect with me in a real way. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I'd love to do that." Hannah's face lit up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine connection between us. Maybe this was what we needed, not just time, but a way to bond. To find common ground outside of the chaos that had been our lives lately. The rest of the week went by smoothly. Hannah stayed out of trouble. The baby started sleeping a little longer at night, and I even managed to catch up on some much-needed rest. It felt like the storm was finally passing. Like we were finding our way back to some semblance of normalcy. One afternoon, I decided to take Hannah up on her offer to go shopping. We drove to a fabric store on the other side of town. Just the two of us. She was animated, pointing out different fabrics, excitedly explaining which ones would work best for the dresses she had drawn. It was the most relaxed I'd seen her in a long time. And I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride watching her come into her own. As we were browsing the aisles, she turned to me and said, "Thanks for doing this. I know things have been hard lately." I paused, caught off guard by her comment. "They have," I admitted, "but we're getting through it." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't mean to make things harder. I don't know. I guess I wanted attention. And I didn't know how to ask for it." I sighed, feeling a mix of emotions. "I get it, Hannah, but you've got to understand that I'm trying my best. It's hard to balance everything. And sometimes I get overwhelmed. It doesn't mean I don't care about you." "I know," she said softly. "I'll try to be better." It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a start. And in that moment, I realized that maybe that's all we could ask for. Small steps toward rebuilding the trust and understanding that had been fractured over the past few weeks. When we got home, Mark was waiting for us, a grin spreading across his face when he saw the bags of fabric we had brought back. "Looks like you two had a successful trip," he said, giving me a knowing look. "We did," I said, smiling. "Hannah's going to make her first dress." Mark's eyes lit up with pride as he turned to Hannah. "I can't wait to see it." Later that night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet again, Mark and I sat on the couch together, the weight of the day finally lifting. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of tension, moments of exhaustion, but it felt like we were on the right track. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I asked, resting my head on his shoulder. "Yeah," he said, wrapping his arm around me. "We are." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. The weeks that followed felt like we were finally moving towards some semblance of stability. Hannah and I were getting along better. And it felt like we had reached an understanding. She wasn't testing my limits as much. And I wasn't snapping as easily. That trip to the fabric store became a turning point for us, giving us something to bond over that wasn't related to the everyday chaos of our blended family. Mark continued making an effort to support me more. He cut back on some of his hours. And although he still worked long shifts, he made sure to be more present when he was home. He even started taking on more of the household chores, which was a relief. It felt good not to be carrying everything alone. Slowly, the weight on my shoulders lessened, though it never truly disappeared. But at least now, I felt like I wasn't doing everything on my own. One Saturday, while the baby napped and the house was unusually quiet, Hannah asked if I could help her start on her dress. She had picked out a soft, floral fabric during our shopping trip, and now she was eager to turn it into something real. I couldn't sew to save my life, but I was more than willing to sit with her while she worked and offer what little guidance I could. As we laid out the fabric and she carefully measured and cut, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was one of the rare moments where I wasn't rushing from one task to the next. And I allowed myself to simply be present, to enjoy the quiet and the time spent with her. It was a rare gift, and I was grateful for it. Hannah worked diligently, her concentration unwavering as she sewed the first few pieces together. I watched her, impressed by her focus and determination. She reminded me so much of myself at her age, wanting so desperately to prove herself, to be seen, to create something that was entirely her own. "You're really good at this," I said, breaking the silence. She looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks," she mumbled, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "I've been practicing." "It shows," I said, meaning it. I can't wait to see the finished dress. For the first time in what felt like forever, we shared a genuine smile. There was no tension, no unspoken resentment, just two people, working side by side, finding a connection where there hadn't been one before. As the days passed, things started to feel easier. The baby was sleeping longer stretches. The other kids were settling into their routines. And even the sickness that had plagued our house for so long finally seemed to be fading. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of stress. Still nights where I collapsed into bed, utterly exhausted, but it was better. It was manageable. One evening, after the kids were all in bed, Mark and I sat down at the kitchen table, going over bills and the grocery list. It was mundane, the kind of task we'd done 100 times before. But there was something different about it now. We were working together, as a team, and I could feel the difference. "We're getting there," Mark said, glancing up from the bills with a small smile. Yeah, I agreed, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in a long time. We are. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It felt like we were starting to thrive in our own messy, chaotic way. But then, as life tends to do, just when things were beginning to settle, another challenge was thrown our way. It was a Friday evening when Mark got a call from his boss. I could tell from his expression that something was wrong before he even hung up the phone. What is it? I asked, dreading the answer. They're cutting hours, he said, rubbing a hand over his face. I'll be working less for a while. Probably won't be bringing in as much money. I felt my stomach drop. We just started getting back on our feet financially after months of scraping by. The idea of losing part of his income was terrifying. Okay, I said slowly, trying to process the information. We'll figure it out. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with worry. I don't want you to have to pick up more of the burden. You've already been doing so much. I know, I said, my voice quiet, but we'll get through it. We always do. And just like that, the weight that had started to lift settled back onto my shoulders. The thought of having to stretch our budget even thinner, of possibly needing to go back to work earlier than I'd planned, was overwhelming, but I didn't let myself spiral. I couldn't, not when so many people were depending on me. That night, after Mark went to bed, I stayed up, staring at the numbers on the budget sheet, trying to figure out how we could make it work. I could feel the exhaustion creeping back in, the stress wrapping itself around me like a heavy blanket. But I pushed it aside. I couldn't afford to fall apart now. As I sat there, the house quiet and dark around me, I thought about everything we'd been through, the arguments, the exhaustion, the endless responsibilities, and I realized that despite it all, we were still standing, we were still here, still fighting, still finding moments of joy and connection in the midst of the chaos. Maybe that's what life was about, finding those small moments, holding onto them, and letting them carry you through the harder times. Maybe that was enough. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know what the future would hold. But for now, I was okay with that. Because even in the midst of all the uncertainty, I knew one thing for sure. We would keep going. We would keep pushing forward. Together. It's been months since everything came to a head. And while life still has its ups and downs, there's a sense of peace that's settled over our home. We've weathered the storm, and we're stronger for it. I've learned that life doesn't get easier just because you survive a difficult chapter. It simply gives you more tools to handle the next one. Hannah and I have grown closer. The fabric store trip marked a turning point in our relationship. But it was the day-to-day efforts we both made that truly strengthened our bond. She finished her dress, an impressive piece for a first attempt, and proudly wore it to school. I made sure to tell her every chance I got how proud I was of her. It wasn't just about the dress, but about the way she opened up, the way she let me in. I think she finally understands that I don't hate her. That I never did. I was just overwhelmed, lost in the sea of responsibility. And I didn't know how to ask for help. Mark's work situation eventually stabilized. He still works long hours. But the panic we both felt when his hours were cut down has passed. We've had more serious conversations about money, our future, and how to support each other when things get tough. He tries harder now, harder to be present, harder to share the load, and harder to communicate when he's struggling. I do too. We've found a rhythm, an imperfect but functional balance. Some days are easier than others. But that's the reality of family life. I've come to accept that. As for me, I've learned the importance of asking for help before I hit my breaking point. I'm learning how to set boundaries, how to let go of the guilt that comes with needing space. I'm a mom, a stepmom, and a wife, but I'm also a person with needs. And that's okay. I've stopped feeling guilty for wanting a break, for wanting time for myself. I've learned that taking care of myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. The baby is growing fast, and the sleepless nights have become fewer. I've found a routine with her that works. And while the exhaustion still lingers on the edges of my days, it doesn't consume me like it once did. I even started doing yoga again, a small thing. But it feels like a victory. The other kids are doing well too. The sickness that once ran through our house like wildfire has finally burned out. And everyone is back to their usual energetic selves. They're growing, changing, and sometimes it feels like I blink, and they've become different people. But that's the beauty and the challenge of parenting, isn't it? Watching them grow while trying to keep up with the changes. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe how close we came to unraveling. But we didn't. We made it through. And that's something I'm proud of. Life isn't perfect, but it's real. It's messy and exhausting and overwhelming. But it's also filled with moments of love, laughter, and connection. And that's what keeps me going. That's what makes it all worth it. As I sit here, writing this with a rare moment of peace in the house, I feel a sense of gratitude that I haven't felt in a long time. For my family, for the strength I've found, and for the lessons I've learned. We're not perfect, but we're doing our best. And for now, that's enough.